Welcome to our middle market moment, where we speak with other professionals who can help business owners build value, de-risk their companies, and prepare both personally and professionally to do the deal of a lifetime through mergers and acquisitions. Today, I want to welcome Homer Smith from Konvergent Wealth Partners. Homer and his team work with successful families and business owners to advance their wealth. They focus on planning, wealth management, and family office services to help high net worth families and business owner clients quiet the noise around their financial life, gain alignment on their values and goals, and execute on the actions needed to manage their business and their personal wealth. Homer also ensures clients avoid costly mistakes by quarterbacking the critical planning process that allows clients to achieve that peace of mind when approaching the sale of their business and then managing their wealth post-close. It's my pleasure to welcome Homer Smith. Hey, Homer, how are you?
I'm well, Craig. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Absolutely. You and I have known each other for a lot of years, and I've been privy to some of the excellent work that you do on behalf of our clients. So I want to thank you for that. And I think our time together will be best spent in terms of backing up a little bit. We talk a lot about M&A transactions, but ultimately being well prepared, having a great plan, and executing to that plan is the key to what I'll call a dream exit.
Yep.
So I want to jump right in and talk about kind of the trifecta of M&A, where the personal readiness, the business readiness, and the market receptiveness align.
Yep.
So maybe from your perspective, how do you help your clients truly prepare for an exit event?
Yeah, I think I'll start by kind of higher level, to your intro. What we really are known for more than anything else is helping successful families and business owners navigate life's complex transitions. And that could be anything from related to M&A, maybe moving just from owner operator to owner and taking a step back from the day-to-day operations of the business, to looking at that internal transition where it might go to the management team or the next generation in a family business, or maximizing the sale value in an outside sale. And then post-transaction, helping our families think about how are they going to transition this wealth to the next generation in a way that's positive and impactful and not destructive. And so all of that planning, to your point, from pre-sale to post-sale, is all integrated in what we do. And I'd say the first step in what we would really highlight for business owners is you got to start this early. And doing the planning once you have an LOI in hand is going to be a challenge. I know we'll probably get into more of that as we go through the call. Sure. But I'd say the most critical component to this is time. And the more time that your team, including your M&A advisor, your wealth manager, your accountant, your attorney, have to help you map out all of the options that you have available to you, the more successful your outcome is going to be.
Yeah, that's great advice. And let me back up even further. Let's maybe a baseline so that people that are listening to this can kind of see themselves in it a little bit. What do you see in working with all your clients? Kind of when they come to you, what is their state of readiness relative on the personal front and the business front? You're dealing with some successful people that have owned really successful companies, and they've got different pockets of wealth perhaps, but what do you see as the general state of readiness and kind of education of that, would-be seller that says, all right, I'm done, I want to sell, or I want to transition to management or transition to family?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to readiness from our point of view. It's financial readiness, but it's also mental, emotional readiness for the sale. And I would say what we found is that it's rare that they're ready for both. And the emotional readiness is often the more surprising one, but most of our clients are founder-led business owners. This business is their baby. This is something they've been working on for 30, 40 years. Maybe they've been through multiple market cycles. They've almost lost the business potentially multiple times. And they've never developed hobbies outside of the business. And so their purpose is the business and their clients and their staff. So thinking about life after the business and what they're going to do can be a very challenging component of this that needs to be addressed. On the financial side, I think it's very similar. They might be seeing numbers for the first time in the last 5 or 10 years in terms of where they finally got this business to the point where it is kicking off a really good income for them. But they haven't done the math on, okay, if I sell this thing, what is my true net going to be after I sell this? They hear numbers all the time from other friends or from professionals that have helped sell other businesses. And so they're putting numbers in their head of what they think their business is worth, but they don't know for sure. And they also haven't done the math on, okay, what about taxes and what's the true net going to be? And what is my budget really right now? Because they're living off the cash flow of the business. How much of that cash flow is running through the business, and then paying for things that, post transaction are going to have to come from after tax dollars, not potentially pre-tax dollars. So I would say it's there's a lot of work, and pretty much every client that we've taken on that needs work on both the financial readiness pre-sale and the emotional, mental readiness pre-sale.
Yeah, maybe you can share, tell me a little bit about, on the emotional side, how do you help business owners make that transition? Because as you mentioned, you work with a lot of founders, so do we. And founders are a special breed, right? They tend to be a little more controlling because they really want their business to succeed and they believe it's up to them. And as they progress the business, they start to develop a management team and scale and have to hand off the reins a little bit. But that final letting go or that final turning over is difficult emotionally for them often. How do you assist them, or what practical advice do you give them to kind of trial balloon and exit? Or the famous one is, well, I'm going to play golf every day. Well, after doing that for a couple months, golf isn't always an everyday occurrence, right? How do you help them navigate that?
I think the most important thing, at least in all of the research we have done around this, especially with founders, is this idea of purpose. And what we help them understand, and it's difficult because they're still often very engaged in the running of the business, but we help them try to think through what is going to be your purpose every day when you don't have this business anymore. Because right now, getting up every day is not an issue. They love the business. They may not love every day in terms of some of the work involved, but they love this business. This is one of their kids effectively, right? And so the idea of not having that business around to motivate them to get out of bed every day, what is going to be that motivation? What's going to be that purpose that keeps them going? And we, on the unfortunate side, there's actually a number of studies out on those that retire early, whether it's selling their business or retiring just from a W-2 type job early, and life expectancy actually isn't longer, it's actually shorter for those that retire early. And our belief is, and from our research, is that it's this lack of purpose, and they end up more stressed with nothing to do than the stress of running a very complex middle market business. And so it's really helping them start to think through not just what's going to keep them busy day to day, not the golf, not the travel, but what's going to be that purpose that gets them out of bed and gets them energized to keep learning, keep developing, keep growing, which I think is the most important component of that.
Yeah, I think you and I have both seen some studies around post-transaction satisfaction. And
Yes.
there's a high correlation with purpose and with being prepared for a transaction versus having a transaction run you over, right?
Yes.
It was this blitz, right? Maybe talk a little bit about, or even some of the folks that you've seen where they take away, even though they've sold their baby, they take away a high degree of satisfaction because of their level of preparedness, their level of purpose and understanding. Do you have any stories
Yeah.
around that? I know you can't talk about individual clients, but just generically speaking.
Yeah, well, let's start with, I think, the opposite of that and some of those studies that you mentioned. So we've done some research, and you can definitely, I think, validate it in that from what we've seen, and this is from Biz Buy Sell, and probably on the smaller side on average of businesses, but their research shows that only about 20 to 25% of businesses that basically raise their hand and say, I want to sell, are actually able to complete a transaction in any given year. Now, obviously, if they're coming to you and they've done more of the pre-work and you guys have vetted them and you engage them, that number is going to be higher because you're only going to take on those that are more prepared. But in general, those that are ready and want, or not ready, but want to sell, only about 1 in 4, 1 in 5 complete a transaction. From there, Of those that complete a transaction, from the research we've done, only about 12% of those end up highly satisfied with the outcome. So you
Mhm.
kind of put that together, only about 2.5 to 3% of owners that start the year saying, I want to sell my business, are able to be have a completed transaction and highly satisfied with the result. That's pretty stark. That's not a good number. So what is the difference in those 2 or 3% that make it? What we have recognized in all of this, it is that pre-sale planning. So they did the work on the pre-sale, both corporate planning. So they've done the work to make their business as attractive as possible. They looked at their business from the eye of a buyer or investor, and recognize where are our gaps, where are the things that we're going to have to defend in a transaction, and whether they could fix them or not, they at least knew what the reality was going to be around those issues. So they were prepared. Their financials were in order. They built a moat around their business if they could. They increased recurring revenue, all the key pieces that we know make businesses more valuable. They did the work in advance, right? And then they did the work on the pre-sale personal planning. So they knew the likely net outcome from the transaction, or at least what the minimum needed to be in order to live the lifestyle that they wanted. They did the work thinking through what is going to keep me busy and active, and have that purpose pre-sale. So that 2 or 3%, they did that work on both the corporate pre-sale planning and the personal pre-sale planning.
Yeah, that's huge. And I haven't seen any data around this. Anecdotally, we can probably offer a few thoughts, but as a rule, I'll go left field on you a little bit. But as a rule, the sellers that don't do the planning, don't do the tax preparation, don't do all of those things, you know, obviously they may not get to a transaction, they may not get to deal satisfaction, but how much, just from your experience, do you think they leave on the table by not doing that important work of planning?
Yeah, I think it's pretty significant, and when we get brought in, it's kind of a conversation depending on the timing of, and kind of a stark analogy maybe, but are we fattening up the pig for market and have some time to really get this thing optimized, or are we putting some lipstick on this and just doing our very best to do some tax savings if we can pre-sale, or are we now in the post-sale planning? What can we do on the other side of this? But for those that have the time to prepare, I think it's millions of dollars in
Mhm.
savings, and we're going through that process right now where we have just enough time to do some planning, and the deal size is large enough that it's potentially tens of millions of dollars for this family that's going to be saved just by how we structure the assets prior to the sale. So it can be significant depending on the size of the transaction.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people watching this, and we offer the same advice. And it's shocking how often people don't take us up on this, and we've become more insistent over the years. The three things that need to be done are: go see your investment banker and get an understanding of whether your company is sellable, right?
Yep.
That's number one. And along with that is what your valuation, what the marketplace will reward you with, right? That's our job. We value companies for a living. So now you have kind of the top line. And as you said, get with the CPA and look at the tax ramifications based on different structures. So now you know your net after tax proceeds, or at least an approximation of that. And then the third thing we do, and not necessarily in that order, but is consult with your planning team and your wealth management team to understand your number, and is that enough to meet your goals? Whether your goals are to retire, whether your goals are to start another business, or what have you, knowing your number, your net number, and knowing whether it's enough to reach your goals. So let's maybe jump into that a little bit, in terms of knowing your number. So let's say a client has done the work, gone to an investment bank and say, my business is probably going to sell somewhere in the 40 to 50 million. My tax obligations are going, just for sake of round numbers, are going to be 10 million. So I know I'm going to net between 30 and 40 million. And my goals in working with you might be, I want to make sure that I have enough to retire, or take 5 million of that and start another business. How do you go about that in terms of helping them see the future, see whether there's enough financial resources available to meet their goals?
Yeah, I think there's a couple sides to it. First is, before we even get to running the Monte Carlos and all the financial analysis on their budgets and all of that sort of thing, we do take a step back and say, okay, is there something we can still do pre-sale though to enhance the net that you're going to receive? So you might think it might be 30, 35, but what if we can do some things to make it even more, right? So I think that's the importance of, in the wealth management world, most financial advisors, if not all, can run a Monte Carlo. They have planning software. They can tell you, okay, start with this number, this budget, here's how much you can earn, take out per year, and the likelihood of this money lasting your lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
What is probably less common is, can they do the planning pre-sale to get you a bigger number to start with, which is just going to increase the likelihood those dollars last a significant amount more time. So having a team, again, your accountant, your attorney, your wealth manager, that focus on working with clients going through these types of transitions, I think is really important, because they can enhance the starting point for then creating that plan for distribution and for income creation. And then on the other side of it is, we're not done on the tax, estate, all that kind of planning there either. Is, are there structures we can do on the other side that can make it more likely to minimize taxes going forward, so that it's easier to have these dollars last longer if there's less of a tax drag attached to them. And so for us, taxes are such an important component of the planning that we do. And not only on the income, most people focus on the income tax side. And in a transaction, the federal government is working really hard to limit the options that business owners have from an income tax standpoint. There still are, especially depending on the corporate structure. But one that I think a lot of advisors miss is the estate taxes, and the ability to eliminate a good chunk of the estate tax just on how you plan prior to the sale. So again, it's a combination of how do we address taxes from an estate and income standpoint. And then once we really optimize that, then how do we create the income stream that they're going to need and optimize that for them? And most importantly to all of that is have multiple options. And so our belief is our clients should see all of the best options that are available to them, not just the one or two that we typically like to put in front of clients, but all of them, all of the advantages and disadvantages. And what we're confident in is, if we put the best options in front of our clients, they're going to make a smart decision on what works best for them. And that's really, the focus of what we're trying to do between all of the different planning is helping them make the smart decisions.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think having that approach and really kind of backing up the bus, so to speak, we see it. And you started the program, talked about, what my competitor might have sold for. They receive a lot of anecdotal information about what their company's worth. And a lot of owners right now, as we're meeting, have seen the 2021, record highs for multiples and outcomes. And, ultimately in this market where we're off the record highs by a good bit, people still want those outcomes, right? They still think that their company is worth X. So doing that tax planning up front is huge, because at the end of the day, if you can be smart about it, you may not get the record-breaking multiple in today's market, but if you can save $3 or $4 million, that's the equivalent of winning off the tee box, right? How do you get? And I know most business owners are very tax conscious. Let's put it that way. How do you have that conversation, and how do you get? What's the catalyst? Because everybody says, hey, you should start planning 2, 3, 4, 5 years, but very few people do it. How do you use kind of a catalyst to get them thinking that way, and to get them to see the benefits of doing that planning work?
Yeah. And for us, it's all just around what we call discovery. So the first question we typically will ask an owner is, when is that timeline that they're thinking about the process of selling? And again, it might be 2 years, 5 years, the perpetual 5-year plan that a lot of business owners have. And I want to start asking questions. What are you doing today? What kind of planning are you doing today to minimize the impact of taxes when you do sell? And the answer usually is either I don't know or nothing. And that leads to the possibilities conversation. Okay. Are you interested in learning about options that you might have to mitigate the taxes on the sale of the business? And I'd say that answer has always been a yes. And
Mhm.
so once they know what their options are, then they can make good decisions on whether it's worth pursuing or not for them. But what our goal is to attach numbers to it. So once we identify that it's of interest, we can identify, okay, what's your current structure? What are the available options, and what's the impact if you were to implement them? And is it meaningful enough to move forward on any of them, and just help them again get enough information in front of them so they can make a smart decision on whether they want to pursue that or not.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think we did a study a while back when interest rates were a little lower, and we found that if you had a company car, company paid insurance, and you went through the Starbucks drive-through every day, every work day, and that's a company expense, that you would need $333,000 of post-transaction proceeds, money in the bank, to now that you have to pay for that personally post-transaction. And that's a tough one to get people to kind of get their head wrapped around. But I assume that's also part of that planning that you guys do to say, okay, what does lifestyle look like? What are your goals going forward? And will this transaction meet your goals? And I guess, have you ever come across a situation where maybe sale of the company is not the best plan?
Absolutely. I mean, there are lifestyle businesses out there where the only option for them to keep living the lifestyle they're living is through the business. That the sale process or the sale proceeds from a business, whether it's their industry, whether a lot of times they are the business. And so when you are the business, the ability for you to get a high multiple on the sale is very limited. And if they're not wanting to go through a process of replacing themselves within the business over a number of years, the answer to them often, in that scenario is you're not really saleable. And you're going, in order to keep the same lifestyle that you're living today, the only option is to keep running the business.
Mhm.
um, Again, or unless you're willing to change the way you're running the business to the whole idea of building this for sale. Unless you're willing to go down that road and spend a few years preparing for that, that's just going to be the reality, unfortunately, of their situation.
Yeah, makes sense. And I know I'm jumping around a little bit, and I love the conversation. Let's geek out a little bit, and let's get tactical for a second here. Maybe you can share, and I know everyone's situation is different, right, in terms of what their basis is and all of that from a tax standpoint. But maybe you can kind of educate our audience a little bit as to a couple of the vehicles, if you will, as they start thinking about planning and taxation and maybe saving some dollars, at an exit. Maybe educate us a little bit about what's available out there and what are more of the most common used vehicles, if you will, to help an owner out from a tax saving standpoint.
Yeah, I think that I'll start with some estate planning because I think that's one that's again often missed in that we're at right now, record high federal exemptions for estate and gift taxes. And so we have a window of time over the next couple of years to help clients think through, if there were structures that they could gift a significant amount of their assets, including value in their business, especially if they think the value of that business is going to appreciate in the future. And you can get that value out of your estate but still maintain some level of access to the financial benefits of those assets. Is that something they'd be interested in? And there are vehicles that they could do that. You have to structure them correctly. You have to do it the right way. But they can do that, and by structuring that well and putting them assets out of the estate before the sale, any growth that then happens in the value of the business in the next number of years is going to happen without the tax drag of estate tax in the future. So I think that's a critical one. And again, there's a number of different specific structures, and we'll save people from eyes rolling in the back of their heads on the specifics of it. But there are structures that we can help them with for that. On the income tax side, again, I think the government's doing a pretty good job of trying to limit some of those solutions, but there are a number of them out there, in particular for C corporations, which have been kind of um, a less popular way to structure a company in the last number of years as S corps have really become much more popular for the flow through abilities. But C corporations have some unique tax structuring abilities, whether it's through founder shares of C corps that get some beneficial tax treatment. Two, whether you're going to do something like an employee stock ownership plan, if there's a value in the company of keeping the culture alive and the employees are critical to the business. There's some values in a C corporation structure for that as well. And so there's a number of ways to think through that. And there's a lot of charitable structures if the family is charitably inclined, where there's some significant benefits of shifting some highly appreciated stock into a charitable structure ahead of the sale. That still can provide some economic benefits back to the family post sale for their lifetime or even for their kids' lifetimes. So again, there's a number of strategies. Again, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. They can get really complex depending on the structure of the company. And so, all the time, our goal is, and what we tell a client is, if you don't understand it and you really, really don't understand it well, don't do it. But our job is to at least put those options on the table, help them understand it as best we can, give them the pros and cons, and show the numbers. What's the outcome for you if you were to implement this? And is that meaningful to do this level of planning? There's also, depending on how they own the business, where it's owned, where the income is being generated, there are jurisdictional options, especially if they have more time, where they can potentially move the ownership of the stock into different structures and vehicles. So again, it can get pretty into the weeds, and I'll save the audience from that, but just know that there are options if you do it right. We work with a number of businesses in California, and we often get asked, well, if I just move to Nevada a week before the sale and then move back a week after the sale, can I avoid California income tax? The answer is absolutely not. You cannot do that. But if you have time to plan and you do intend to move out of the state and stay out of the state for a significant period of time, there are ways that you can do this right, but you have to do it right and you have to mean it. But we absolutely help clients think through that, review the options. Again, look at the numbers. Is it worth it to do this? And are you actually going to truly move out of the state? So again, there's a number of things we can look at. But again, our view is we're not interested in getting our clients audited and losing audits. We do things, right down the middle, bright line transactions, and are going to help them understand, how to do it the right way if they're going to do it.
Yeah, that's incredibly valuable. It's interesting, and we've talked about this before. Clients think, and time is the key here, right? If you have enough time, you can get great advice. But they do think, generally speaking, that once they choose a path, they're locked into that path. Oh, I'm a C corp, and I've got look back and forward transitions, and a lot of things to consider there. So they kind of get locked into this thinking. What if my transaction is 30 million instead of 50 million? Do I have to commit to making a philanthropic gift? There's a lot of things that they think are not malleable. But with the proper planning and the proper amount of time, there's usually a lot of flexibility in some of those tax saving plans. And again, I'm going to drag you into the weeds a little bit, like with a donor advised trust. There's some flexibility there that I think a lot of business owners don't really understand, or understand the amount of flexibility. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so there's a difference between planning, understanding your options, having structures ready and in place for, when you're ready to move forward with, going to market and going to a transaction, versus implementing the plan and being done with the movement of assets. And so our goal is always, to your point, maximum flexibility for clients, because things change. Tax laws change, estate laws change, business climate, market conditions change. And so we want to be very careful of locking our clients into a strategy that they can't get out of well before we know what the outcomes of the sale are going to be. And so, whether it's a donor advised fund, a private foundation, a charitable remainder trust, especially on the charitable planning side, because a lot in those scenarios, once you do the gifting, it's hard to unwind those structures. So we want to make sure, number one, they're very charitably inclined if you start going down the road of charitable structures, because the letting the tax tail wag the dog usually does not end up well, because those dollars are going to get to charity, and at some point you got to really want them to make the strategy work meaningfully. But two, you don't have to fund those vehicles 5 years before you sell. You have to do it in advance, but it doesn't have to be well before you're even planning to do the transaction itself. So again, understanding what the options are, what the tax impacts of them are, is important. But to your point, our goal is always to leave as much maximum flexibility into the planning process as can, until we absolutely have to make the decision with those planning components.
Yeah, that's great advice. You touched on it earlier. There's a couple of macroeconomic trends going on, a couple of pandemic inspired trends. Boomers are working longer and they're the most entrepreneurial generation, right? So they own a disproportionate amount of middle market businesses. Um, we've proven that we can work from anywhere through the pandemic. So we're seeing a lot of clients, to your point, talking about domicile, where I want to live. Um, Having more flexibility. They're going to keep their companies a little bit longer, but they're going to work half the year out of one location and half the year out of another. Are you seeing in your practice more people kind of exercising that flexibility, which also gives them some flexibility on the planning side and the tax side?
It does, and we're seeing it especially in higher tax states. It just happens that whether it's Florida, Texas, Nevada, it happens to be a lower tax state where their second home location is. And whether it's for strategic reasons in the business to have a second location in those areas, or whether it's for personal lifestyle reasons, it does allow for us to start the conversation. We just had this with a client yesterday who has been based out of California, but recently bought a commercial building in Texas for distribution reasons. And we started the conversation of it. It might make sense over time for you to move the corporate headquarters to Texas, move your physical residence to Texas, and mean it, and really move there. And at the time of the sale of this primary business, would make a meaningful impact from a tax standpoint. But because we know we have 4 to 5 years for him to do the planning, we can start the conversation, help him understand the benefits of doing it, the disadvantages of doing it, and have plenty of time for it to be a legitimate move. But yes, we are seeing that on the rise. And again, especially in high tax states like California, now Washington, adding their 7% excise tax, capital gains tax onto business transactions. The good news is, we've been working out of California with a lot of clients down there. The playbook is basically the same now. We can apply that we didn't need to in the past. Washington's always been such a low income tax state. It's been very valuable to sell your business here. Now it's become more problematic. And so the good news is there's a good playbook for that. And again, if you have time to plan, there's solutions that can be done.
Yeah, that's terrific. I think ultimately, one thing that entrepreneurs can really start to think about is, this is kind of the planning process, and we spend so much time thinking about growing our business and conquering the next hill. Planning is really kind of a gift you're giving yourself, and it's part of that transition of working in the business to working on the business. Can you maybe, from your perspective, from a planning perspective and a wealth management perspective, maybe can you summarize for us or kind of leave us with some parting thoughts relative to what are the next two or three things, excuse me, that a business owner should be doing to kick off that planning process and start kind of really working on the business and their personal side to get the process going?
Yeah, and I'd say I think it's as much on the professionals as it is on the business owner to help them think through this. And I think one thing that we do really well, that I think is really important to this process, is helping business owners change the mindset from planning of being a cost center for the business to being a profit center. And that by paying fees to your attorneys, your accountants, your wealth managers in advance of a sale to help you think through all of the ideas, if we can help them understand what's the outcome that this planning is going to generate, what's the financial benefit that you're going to get from this, it's much easier for them to see this as an investment in the business to do this kind of planning, when maybe spending 6 figures on fees to your attorney to restructure the business and your estate plan, if that's going to turn into 10 million plus in savings, you're still getting a 100x return on your investment in that structure. And so I think oftentimes the professional world, we're not great at helping them really see the outcome, the benefits from the planning that we do. They just see, we present it as a cost. to them to do the planning without really connecting the dots to the benefits. And so I think that's the important side of it is having a team of professionals around you that is experienced in doing transactions like the one they might be going through and the size that they're going through, that's done this kind of planning and can walk them through the outcomes that it will generate and what difference that will make for them. I think that's, to me, that's just what we see when we get brought in. Is it doesn't, they might have really good professionals around them, very technical experts that are really good at what they're doing. What they haven't been able to do is help the owner really connect to the dots on the outcome by doing some of this planning that they'll get. And so they hesitate because they don't really know what the value is of doing that. And they don't know if they're leaving options on the table that they're just not aware of. Right. And so I think that if you have a good team that can show you all the options, all the pros and cons, what's the actual financial benefit or outcome from doing it, they're going to be in a much better position to make smart decisions.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think I would just echo, as people consider their team, this is a team sport. And really the most effective outcomes I have seen is when, and part of the reason I love working with you is you're highly collaborative. And while you quarterback, the planning and, the process, you're bringing in CPA, iBanker, et cetera. And I think we do the same, right? We're highly collaborative. We want a great outcome and we want an entire deal team serving that client versus having siloed professionals serve that client in their own lane. And I think the outcomes are so much better when you have a highly collaborative full deal team assisting that owner. So thank you for the work you do, and we appreciate it. We appreciate working with you and the great advice that you've shared here today. How do people get in touch with Convergent and Homer Smith?
Yeah, website is convergentwealthpartners.com. We'll make sure that we have that on the screen here. And my email is the best way to reach out. And I'll finish off with this too, is that, for many of us, because just like you, most of our business transactions are with founder-led companies. They're not planning to be serial entrepreneurs where they sell this and start the next one or the next three. This is a one-time, once in a lifetime event. And the dollars are meaningful. It's really important. It's done right. And so again, having the right team around you, the right investment banker, the right wealth manager, accountant, attorney is critical to getting the best outcome and making sure either they're part of the 2 or 3% that have a highly satisfactory outcome, or that we can help shift them from an event where they might not have to moving them into that group to make sure they get there. So that's what I would finish on with that. So appreciate it. Always appreciate working with Craig, with you and your team, and look forward to helping a number of successful business owners, complete that highly satisfactory event here in the next few years.
Thanks, Homer. Thanks for participating in our middle market moment. And we'll look forward to bringing more professionals like Homer to the process and through the dialogue in the coming weeks and months. Thanks for listening.